Well, hello, it's Miss Gina. And just like a year has 12 months, Ratatouille, the junior novelization, has 12 chapters. And we left off on chapter 12. And in a year, 12 is December. But in Ratatouille, 12 is the last chapter of the book. And just like all years must end, all great stories must end. So we're going to read our last chapter today. We're going to dive right in. And you're at Gina's Planet, and I'm so glad you're here. So let's get started. The kitchen was a madhouse. Orders were piling up. A platter of dishes crashed to the ground. A waiter slipped and fell. The kitchen was falling apart under Linguini's leadership. Horst confronted Linguini. "It's your recipe," he said, pointing to a pan filled with gray glop. "How can you not know your own recipe?" "I didn't write it down," said Linguini. "It just came to me." Yeah, that's it. That's the ticket. "Well, make it come to you again, yeah?" said Horst, "because we can't serve this." "We will make it," Colette said reassuringly. "Just tell me what you did." "I don't know what I did," cried Linguini. "We need to tell the customers something," said Horst. The pressure was getting out of control. Linguini couldn't take another minute of it. "Then tell them. Tell them. Ugh." Linguini ran into his office and slammed the door. In the kitchen, Colette and Horst began arguing. Then Horst froze, his gaze fixed on the back door. There, standing in the middle of the doorway, as bold can be, was Remy. He was ready to cook, and nobody was going to stop him. "Rat!" screamed Colette. Horst and Lalo, the chefs, all seized various kitchen utensils and began to charge at Remy. But the little chef didn't move a whisker. Suddenly a voice rang out, "Don't touch him!" It was Linguini. The chefs dropped their weapons and turned to stare at Linguini. "I know this sounds insane," he said. Well, the truth sounds insane sometimes, but that doesn't mean it's not the truth." The cooks exchanged confused glances, and the truth is I have no talent at all. But this rat, he's the one behind these recipes. He's the cook, the real cook. And right in front of the chef's unbelieving eyes, Remy stood on his hind legs and walked over to Linguini. He lowered his palm so that Remy could hop onto it. Linguini lifted Remy to his head, then began picking up spices and holding them up to Remy's nose. The chefs murmured, so that was what he had been up to. "He's been controlling my actions," Linguini explained to the mystified crowd. Remy then gave Linguini's hair a few tugs to demonstrate, and Linguini's limbs began to move. "He's the reason I can cook the food that's exciting everyone. The reason Ego is outside that door. You've been giving me credit for his gift. I know it's a hard thing to believe, but hey, you believed I could cook, right?" Linguini let out a nervous laugh. "Look, this works. It's crazy, but it works. We can get the greatest restaurant in Paris, and this rat, this brilliant little chef, can lead us there." He took a deep breath. "What do you say? You with me?" For a moment, no one moved. Then Horst, tears welling up in his eyes, crossed over to Linguini. Linguini smiled at him gratefully until Horst handed him his hat and his apron and left the kitchen. Not uttering a word, Linguini watched, stunned, as one by one the rest of the staff resigned. Only Colette was left. Colette was angry. She raised her hands as if to slap Linguini, but decided against it. Then she too walked out the door. Linguini sighed deeply. His girlfriend had just abandoned him. He had no waiters, no chefs, a room full of hungry customers, and an important food critic to feed. It was all just too much for him. He looked at Remy, his eyes filled with tears, then turned and ducked into his office. Remy stood in the empty kitchen, utterly alone. Just then, Django stepped out of the dark shadows. He had witnessed the entire scene. Dad, I don't know what to say, Remy cried. I was wrong about you, Django told his son about him. I don't want you to think I'm choosing this over family, Remy said. I can't choose between two halves of myself. I'm not talking about cooking, Django explained. I'm talking about guts. I couldn't do what you just did. I'm proud of you. He turned and let out a piercing whistle. The rest of the rat clan emerged from the shadows, quickly filling the kitchen. We're not cooks, said Django, but you tell us what to do and we'll do it. They heard a creak, and there at the back door was a health inspector. He stood frozen in shock, staring at the kitchen, which was crawling with rats. He slowly backed away and made a run for it. Stop that, health inspector, cried Remy. Django sent a squadron of his strongest rats to catch him. It was as good as done. Remy got down to the next order of business, hygiene. He loaded the rats into the dishwasher, and choosing the light cycle, he got everyone clean and fluffy in no time. Remy began shouting orders. Team 3 will be handling fish. Team 4, roasted items. Team 5, grill team, 6 sauces. Get to your stations. Let's go. When Linguini came out of his office, he was astonished. But he quickly joined the team. He strode up to Remy, suddenly filled with purpose. We need someone to wait tables, he said. Remy nodded. Linguini grabbed his backpack and turned it upside down. A pair of roller skates fell out. That's one way. Moments later, clad in his blades and a waiter's outfit, Linguini burst into the dining room and began distributing menus to the diners with economical precision. I'm sorry for any delay, he explained, but we're a little short tonight. Back in the kitchen, rats were sautéing, seasoning, and grilling up a storm. Remy raced around the room, overseeing everything. He tasted each and every dish before he deemed it perfect enough to leave the kitchen. Linguini glided back and forth between the kitchen and the dining room, delivering the meals. Then the back door swung open. It was Colette. Her eyes nearly doubled in size as she surveyed the bizarre scene before her. Looking as if she might be ill, she turned to leave. Oh, Colette, you came back! Linguini shouted. Colette, She held up her finger to shush him. Don't say a word, she said. If I think about this, I might change my mind. She pulled on her apron and hat. Just tell me what the rat wants me to cook. Remy flipped Gusteau's cookbook open and showed Colette the recipe he had chosen. Suddenly, there was a loud screech of tires, followed by a crashing sound. A moment later, the back door swung open, and the bound and gagged health inspector floated across the floor, supported by a bunch of rats. They quickly dumped him in the food safe. Colette barely even glanced up. Just as she was about to put the very last ingredient into the ratatouille, she found her bowl blocked by a wooden spoon. Remy was holding it. He looked at Colette and made a face. With his spoon, he pointed to the ingredients he had collected himself. Shaking her head in disbelief, Colette complied. Smiling, Remy finished the sauce and put the ratatouille on a plate. Linguini skated it into the dining room. A hush fell over the room as the simple meal arrived at Ego's table. At the next table, Skinner received the same meal. Ratatouille? They must be joking, he muttered. He glanced at Ego, who seemed equally unimpressed. As he watched Ego scribble a few notes in his pad, Skinner cackled to himself delightedly. Linguini watched the critic, his eyes full of worry. A bored look on his face, Ego poked his fork into the stew and brought it to his lips. But wait, what was this intoxicating aroma? As his mouth closed around the forkful of food, the sounds and sights of the restaurant faded away. The taste combinations were like a symphony. Memories began to swirl in his head. Suddenly, he was a little boy again and had just fallen off his bike. His mother took him her sniffling son inside and gave him a plate of food to comfort him. A plate of ratatouille. While Ego was lost in his reverie, his pen slipped from his hand. It clattered to the table, jolted him out of his memories. He blinked and looked down at the extraordinary stew. And for the first time in a very long while, Ego smiled. And then he helped himself to another mouthful. Growing increasingly upset, Skinner watched the transformation on Ego's face. Then he himself took a forkful full of the ratatouille. He loved the way it tasted. He hated it for being so delicious. No, it can't be, he muttered. Skinner burst into the kitchen, unable to take it any more. Who cooked the ratatouille? He shouted. I demand to know. The rats all stopped what they were doing and turned to look at him. Skinner gasped. Moments later, he found himself being bound and gagged and placed into the food safe right next to the health inspector. In the dining room, Ego was nearly finished. He did what his mother had long ago told him never to do in public. He took one long, bony finger, dabbed the last smear of sauce from his plate, and brought it to his lips. Suddenly, smiling broadly, Ego patted his lips with his napkin and turned to Linguini. I can't remember the last time I asked a waiter to give my compliments to the chef, he said. And now I find myself in the extraordinary position of having my waiter be the chef. Thanks, Linguini replied, but I'm just your waiter tonight. Then who do I thank for the meal? Ego asked, a bit confused. Linguini stared at him for a moment, unsure of how to respond. He excused himself and returned with Colette. Ego began to compliment Colette, but she stopped him. She was not the chef either. Ego was now intrigued, and he demanded to meet the mystery chef. After all the diners had left, Colette and Linguini brought out Remy. He looked slightly nervous. Ego laughed, thinking it was a joke. But Colette and Linguini assured him that it was not a joke at all. They told their story, Ego interrupting with occasional questions. And when the story was over, Ego stood, thanked them for the meal, and left without another word. That night, no one, rat or human, could sleep as they anxiously awaited the next morning's review. Remy sat up all night long on Linguini's window sill, staring at the Eiffel Tower. The next day, the review appeared. Colette, Linguini, Remy, and the rat clan gathered in the kitchen to read it, and this is what it said. In many ways, the work of a critic is easy. We risk very little, yet enjoy a position over those who offer up their work and themselves to our judgment. We thrive on negative criticism, which is fun to write and to read. But the bitter truth we critics must face in the grand scheme of things, the average piece of junk is more meaningful than our criticism designating it so. But there are times when a critic truly risks something, and that is in the discovery and defense of the new. Last night, I experienced something new, an extraordinary meal from a singularly unexpected source. To say that both the meal and its maker have challenged my preconceptions is a gross understatement. They have rocked me in my core. In the past, I have made no secret of my disdain for Chef Gusteau's famous motto, anyone can cook. But I realize that only now do I truly understand what he meant. Not everyone can become a great artist, but a great artist can come from anywhere. It is difficult to imagine more humble origins than those of the genius now cooking at Gusteau's, who is, in this critic's opinion, nothing less than the finest chef in France. I will be returning to Gusteau's soon, hungry for more. Colette and Linguini embraced each other. Remy and the Rat Clan cheered. The night before, running the kitchen, working with his family, taking one of Gusteau's recipes and making it his own, and pleasing the harshest food critic in France, if not in the world. It had been a great night. It had been the happiest night of Remy's life, in fact. The end? No way. Here's what happened next. They had to let Skinner and the health inspector loose, and those two, ratted everyone out. The Ministry of Health closed down Gusteau's for good. Remy, Linguini, and Colette were all unemployed. The rats no longer had a place to get quality food. And Ego was fired. He'd never review another restaurant again. The end? Guess again. Remy, Linguini, and Colette opened a bistro. Linguini served. Colette and Remy cooked. There was something for everyone. A small bistro in the back was for the rats, and a large one in the front was for the humans. The name, Le Ratatouille. Of course, it became one of the most popular places in town. And their most loyal customer, he was tall, skinny, former food critic, turned small business investor with an intense love of ratatouille. It was, in fact, Anton Ego, and he came in for a bowl of ratatouille, sometimes 2 every night. And soon, Anton Ego was skinny no longer. Gusteau had been right. Anyone, regardless of upbringing, training, type of kitchen, or even species, could cook. The end? You bet. Endings don't get much happier than this one. So they started a bistro because Gusteau's restaurant got closed down. There's Remy. And it says, right there's Remy with his wooden spoon. It says, Remy is a rat who enjoys the finer things in life. When a happy student When a happy accident lands him in the kitchen of a Parisian restaurant, he can't resist helping a hapless cook create culinary masterpieces that have all Paris waiting in line for a taste. With a little encouragement from an imaginary master chef, Remy gets his new friend out from under the thumb of the restaurant's cruel manager and follows his own dreams of becoming a great chef. Ratatouille, the junior novelization, retells the whole tasty story of the new animated Disney Pixar hit and features 8 pages of full-color movie skills. Stills, not skills. Stills, like still pictures. There's Antonigo. Let's see if we can find one of Remy. There's a couple pictures for you. So that was the end of our book. I hope you enjoyed it. That was chapter 12. Like the year ends on December, the 12th month. Our book ended with 12 chapters at the 12th chapter. The end. And I hope you enjoyed that. Remember to read more in 2024 and grow your brain. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.